Good morning, Chicago. Welcome to another episode of Bytes Over Bagels.
Good morning, Jesse.
Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Bytes Over Bagels. How are you this morning, Mary?
I am doing great. Sun is shining. It's nice outside. Excited to be here.
It's a great day. So we are really looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to this episode to hear who we got on. We got Memorial Day coming up. What do we got going on for this episode?
Yeah, we got Rod Levy from Code Platoon. Don Bora and I talked to him. It was a really great episode, and I'm really excited for everyone to listen in.
What does Code Platoon do again, real quick?
So Code Platoon is a nonprofit that is a dev bootcamp for veterans and military spouses. So focuses specifically on people that are readjusting, coming out of the military and their families and trying to get them into the tech industry.
Cool. And what am I going to learn out of this?
You are going to learn how to get more grit in your life, Jesse.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
Let's get to it.
Today's episode is brought to you by 8-Bit Studios, a global leader in mobile and website product strategy in Chicago. If you're in need of digital or product strategy, a native app or web app, reach out to them at 8bitstudios.com.
Good morning, Chicago. I'm Mary.
And I'm Don, Mary's backup singer for today.
And we are joined here by Rod Levy from Code Platoon. Good morning, Rod.
Morning, Mary. Morning, Don. Thanks for having me.
So, Rod, Code Platoon and you specifically have a really, I think, fun origin story.
Thanks for the lead-in. After I finished Dev Bootcamp and I'd worked as a developer and realized how really hard it was to be a developer and that maybe it was too hard for me, I decided that I did want to do something with myself. I'd been a career changer and I sort of sat with what to do next. And then one day my son, who was 12 at the time, said, "Hey, Dad, can we get Call of Duty?" And I was like, well, Call of Duty, first-person shooter, I'm not opposed to it in principle, but I'm not sure that you're quite old enough yet. So he said, that's fine, but just so you know, here, take a look at this. It's a website. All the profits from the first day of Call of Duty sales, the 0-day Call of Duty, go to the Call of Duty Foundation. So he sends me a link, and I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. A couple of weeks
Smart
later,
kid.
He's way smarter than
we're all
I
gonna
am.
work. We're all gonna work for this kid someday.
Yeah, look out. Yeah, he reminds me all the time. He's the reason I'm doing what I'm doing. So a couple of weeks later, I finally opened up the link, and the website really just talked about why they supported veterans, why it was so important to the Call of Duty Foundation. And it talked about veterans' underemployment or unemployment, and it talked about the difficulties they face transitioning, and it talked about that they have all these great skills that are ready for the workplace, but that they don't have the actual job-ready skills. So like I mentioned before, the grit, leadership, working in teams, they have all of that in spades, but the civilian world isn't really ready to understand how to incorporate that into their world.
Right.
So I thought, oh, you know what? I mean, shouldn't you just have a training place where you can just teach them some job-ready skills like a dev boot camp? So I said, okay, you know what? There's got to be a dev boot camp out there for veterans. I'm going to go volunteer at one for a little while I'll try to figure this out, because it seems to me like this is a great way to help the veterans who've served, and this is going to be easy. And I looked around, and there was no organization that was serving just veterans to teach them how to be developers. So I'm like, well, I know about this model. I know about this population. I care about this population, and this can help solve for a few people in a really meaningful way, this struggle that so many of them face. So So I called Don up the next day. I'm like, Don, does this sound like a crazy idea? And you're like,
said yes.
Yes.
All right. So when he did call me up and we went out for a beer and to talk about this, Rod positioned this, and I've always had kind of like a soft spot for the military as well. And I almost served in high school, and it's a longer story, But when you told me about this, I remember my immediate reaction. I was running a boot camp also at the same time, and I remember thinking, all of my military students had grit in spades. And even if they struggled with the material, they never stopped. And it was inspirational watching these, and I call them kids, but watching these kids go through. And how has that been for you? How's that panned out?
Yeah, I mean, like exactly like you said there, I love going to the classroom. I get energized by being in that classroom because whether I'm there at 9 o'clock in the morning or if I show up at 5:30 or 7:30, they're working away. Sometimes they're pounding their head against the table. But you can see that they're working diligently, and this is hard. You both have been through boot camp. It can be hard, and ours is particularly so. But they're completely motivated. They have the grit and spades, and that's what gets most of them through the program.
Well, I've inflicted the pain. I didn't go through the pain. So.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're on the taskmaster side.
Yeah. But it's true. Like when I mentor at Code Platoon, the students that I've had a couple students that were struggling with material, but you'd never know it. You would never know it. They were like, all right, what's next? Constantly.
Yeah, they come through all the time.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
How do you get someone that is completely ignorant and knows nothing about software development to being ready to get a job in the industry in, 12 weeks, 14
weeks? Yeah. Like I said before, what's most important for us, we screen for grit, interest, and aptitude. Aptitude is important, but it's not actually the most important part. I'd say grit is really and just a deep desire to do this. So our application is not very difficult, but it requires a fair amount of all three. And so when our students come in, they finished some basic coding challenges, they've demonstrated that they have an interest in becoming a software developer. If you have that interest and the passion, it's actually a ton of fun to develop. Like writing code is hard, but you're creating stuff out of thin air. It is almost magic. So for the people that want to do this, they don't mind putting in 10, 12-hour days. We just have to make sure that you're the right person.
Once the program's done, what are these veterans going off and doing once they've completed Code Platoon?
Well, naturally, our program is intended to train professionals. So we're trying to get them into the career. One of the things, really the two main components that I tried to make sure our program had that most programs don't have, and since we're a nonprofit, we're able to focus on this mission of serving our students and just them. One was we try to have scholarships on the front end so that our program is affordable. So we have very big scholarships for anybody who walks in the door. But then to your point about what do they do afterwards, everyone wants to get a job pretty much. We try to make sure that most of our graduates have an internship lined up. And the way we do that is we work with Chicago tech-enabled companies to commit to host one of our graduates for an internship. And these are companies that are big tech players in Chicago, DRW, Echo Global, Coyote Logistics, Motorola, a bunch of others. And they agree to host one of our graduates for an internship. After that, there's no commitment to hire, but almost every time the company says, you know what, this worked out pretty well. We're going to make a full-time offer. And that's so we have a really good placement right with our graduates because they do get these internships. The ones that don't get internships usually are able to find work on their own as well. But again and again, tech companies are finding this is a great source of talent, and our graduates are finding that once they get that first tech job, like I said before, the demand for software developers is huge. Once you've proven yourself, even for a year or two, the world is your oyster. There's so many opportunities out there for developers.
What's your proudest moment since starting Code Platoon?
Wow. Every time we graduate a class, it's a proud moment. I can't say any one was prouder than another. But for me, it's seeing the validation of the model every time when we talk about, our graduates, they start out not from nothing, but most of them are underemployed, some are unemployed. And then when they finish our program, they go on to get great jobs. Many of them are making six figures in 2 or 3 years out of the program. And that would have never been available to them. And so they say, thank you very much. You've done, we really appreciate all the work you've done for us. And we just tell them, listen, all we did was we just laid the groundwork for you. We put the rails up, and then you did all the hard work. But that was our expectation all along. If we could just lower the boundaries the barriers to entry, that they would put in the work, and then they would succeed. So every graduation, every time someone gets a full-time offer, a little champagne cork goes off in my mind.
Mm-hmm. And a real champagne cork, maybe?
More of a wine drinker.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll just pull a cork.
Don, what's the biggest piece of advice you tend to offer to people going through the program at Code Platoon?
It kind of depends on the context, but man, that's a really hard question to answer because it kind of depends on what they're asking about. But really, I think the biggest thing for them to take away is writing software is hard. You're going to make a ton of mistakes. We all do. And getting them to kind of borrow your confidence as a professional and get them that visceral knowledge that we screw up all the time. You're going to screw up all the time. Don't worry about that. Just worry about getting the work done. And really kind of leaning into the creative aspect of it. That's something that people don't normally think about with software. It's extremely creative.
Yeah. If I just want to tack on that, it's a bit of a veer here, but I remember when I asked you, like, who tends to succeed? Obviously, grit's important and aptitude's important, but you're like, actually music majors do really well in coding. and what we found is that there's this myth that to succeed as a developer, you have to be in STEM, you have to be science or tech or engineering. And in fact, we do have some folks who are with engineering backgrounds, but some of the best ones come through with either actually linguists. Right. So we have a lot of cryptology linguists, and when I see a linguist on an application, I'm like, let's get this person in because they tend to do really, really well in the field.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with high school students, and the high school teachers ask me where to source their students, and I'm like, go to your music program, go to your foreign language program.
Yeah,
those are your students.
Absolutely.
What's the tie-in between linguists, foreign language, and coding?
Man, I wish I knew.
It's been described to me that coding is just another language when you have to be able to think through, when you're learning a different language, there's just a set of building blocks and there's a way to deconstruct the process and there's a set of rules. And so a lot of that translates pretty well into how to write code.
I imagine that the interview process is something that you coach people on at Code Platoon, right? Like once they've learned all the skills, how do they show employers that they've learned all this? Given that they have a lot of the emotional skills like grit and leadership that you've mentioned, that help them succeed, how do you help them prepare for interviews? So they can put their best foot forward once they've completed the program.
We got folks like Don and a lot of other developers in the Chicago community that come volunteer. And let me step back. We have a really robust career preparation component to our program. So 80% of our program is probably technical curriculum, just hardcore learn to code. 20% is soft skills, career development. And so we have folks like Don and a lot of other software developers come in and help us with technical interviews, whiteboarding interviews, behavioral interviews. We have a few HR professionals who come in and help with LinkedIn preparation. We do that a lot. And then resume preparation. So every component of being career facing, we try to make sure that they're prepared for all of that.
Mary asked earlier about proudest moments for Code Platoon, and I personally, one of my proudest moments for you and for the organization was that Newman's Own Foundation scholarship or the grant. So can you talk about that a little bit?
That was very cool. So Newman's Own does a scholarship where they invite nonprofit organizations throughout the country to compete, and there were, I think, about 300 applications submitted. We were one of 5 selected, and then you and I flew into D.C. We received an award in the Pentagon with General Dunford, Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. So it was a very cool experience. And I think what was great about it is that, obviously personally it was a great experience, but it really validated that what we're doing was something that was considered interesting, innovative, and important. So, to have external validation like that was really great because, again, like I get energized seeing the students every day, but we need to make sure that anybody who's going to touch our program recognizes that we are legitimate. We're here to serve the veterans. We're here to do something different, and we're here to do it thoughtfully and, in our case, innovatively.
Yeah, meeting that general was pretty intimidating.
Yeah.
And he was a really, really nice guy.
Yeah.
One of the things that kind of blew me away was how impressively inspiring all the other cohort was for our group. So that the other 4 winners, just unbelievable stories, unbelievable. And I was, and the fact that we were in that cohort of people getting that grant,
it was
amazing.
Yeah, it was very cool. It was a little surreal.
Yeah, it was.
Especially because neither you or I ever served, so to be considered sort of in that same, and I think everyone else that won was being led by a veteran.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So Rod, I want to hear more about the experiences and the grit that the veterans are going through this program. Tell me one or two of your favorite memories.
Give us some stories. What stories?
I mean, we have so many of our students come through, and I mentioned before, they're almost always underemployed. Certainly, and sometimes they're employed to what you would expect them to be for their education, but they have so much more. So I'll tell you quickly a couple stories. One is one of our students from our first class, our early classes. This gentleman, you could see, has a tremendous amount of intelligence and wit, and the way he writes reflects that. So he got into our program, and when we were talking to him, and he's like, prior to this, I was just stacking boxes. It's like, okay, well, that's interesting. What was your degree? And he's like, I don't have a degree. It's like, oh, okay, well, what happened when you finished high school? He's like, I didn't finish high school. I went straight to the Army, and I didn't actually graduate at the time. So I was like, well, that's amazing. Like, I wouldn't know that talking to you. And there's still a bias in corporate America against folks without college degrees. I forget about high school degrees. This guy now is making six figures. He's doing extremely well, and he's the prototypical Code Platoon graduate. He would get there in the morning early. He would leave late, and then when he got placed at a company, I would talk to his mentor there, and they'd say, yeah, well, he's here before everyone else, and he leaves after everyone else, and then when he goes home, he's reading so that he can come in with good questions the next day. So that's exactly the kind of that's just prototypical for us. More recently, we had another graduate who was in the Air Force. He did have a college degree, but he was selling mattresses. Mm-hmm. And you see that all the time. Folks they have a degree, they're not doing what they want to do. He wanted to get into tech, and he scrounged around, went through our program, and now he's placed as an apprentice at a great tech company. He's doing really well, and he's another example of somebody who came in, worked really hard, struggled not with the material. He was good with the material, but struggled like everyone else. And now he's out, launched into another career, and that's like we're infiltrating the Chicago tech scene little by little. We're we're going to be everywhere.
Yeah. Man, I've met some amazing people through Code Platoon, and always very, very inspiring. And one of the two that stand out for me are one of the women that went through one of the first cohorts. She was an AWACS engineer.
Oh yeah.
She was on a plane that followed around Air Force One, Obama's plane. And that was her job. Her job was to scramble jets. It was crazy.
That's pretty amazing.
It was really cool. And I just met a guy this last year who his job was special ops recon. So in the battlefield, or I guess in the theater, he would go out and do recon and come back and report the threats in the area so that the commander could deploy people.
Yeah, and what's fascinating to me is that I try to make sure I have a one-on-one with every one of our students, and I like to ask them a little bit just about their personal story. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times I get this context, around, well, before I was stacking boxes, before I was doing this. But the part that's fascinating to me is that as you're talking to these folks, then you get their military experience. Well, 2 years ago I was deployed in Afghanistan, and I was leading a Marine battalion. And you hear these stories, and I'm like, this very same person sitting across from me was 2 years ago in warfare, heavily armed, risking his life, serving on our behalf. And here he is, just jeans and a t-shirt, learning how to code.
Right.
Like, what a thrill for me personally to be able to help out these men and women that have done so much for us.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool, and that's part of why I'm still involved. Just like, it's just inspiring being around him. It's like you can't help but try to be better.
Right.
Serving the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Rod, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really, really wonderful hearing
Thanks
more
for having
about
me.
Code Platoon.
It's been a blast.
How can people find out more information about Code Platoon?
I'm glad you asked. So our website, codeplatoon.org, has all our information. And then you can also follow us on Twitter at codeplatoon_org. And we also have a Facebook page.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much again for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Yeah, thanks, Rod. And for those of you who can't see, because we're on a podcast, Rod's growing out his hair now.
Trying to be like you, Don.
Yeah. So that is good luck on the hair.
Thanks.
Yeah, no
I
problem.
definitely need help there.
So we'd love for you guys to follow along, subscribe. You can now find us on iTunes and Spotify. We're going to continue to add places where you guys like to be and apps that you like to be in. And really, we'd love your feedback. If you want to put a comment on the website, sign up for the newsletter, put a comment on YouTube, feel free to reach out to any of those mediums, and we'd love to find out, what is the content you're really interested in? How can we help, enlighten your commute in the morning?
You're listening to EBS 8-Bit Studio Station.